Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Hello and welcome to the Sport Business Podcast. I am Martin Ross, Editor-in-Chief of Sport Business News. We're back. John Rest is run away after 1 week. He's on holiday, but we're joined by Joe Perry, not the 90s snooker sensation, but editor of Sport Business Media. Hello, Joe.
Thank you very much. I mean, John, living up to his name, right? 1 week into the new job, and he's on holiday already. But thank you for having me as your special guest co-host. It takes me back to our first interview. I mean, listeners won't know about this, but you interviewed me for my first job at Sport Business.
Did I make a Joe Perry reference then, or not?
I think so. I mean, yeah, the joke is still going 5 years later. But yeah, the interview, I remember it because I think we spent more time talking about Joe Worrell and Scott McKenna than my CV or the sports industry or anything like that. But hey, 5 years down the line and we're doing a podcast together. So
excellent.
It worked out.
Yeah, Joe's a big Nottingham Forest fan for listeners, and Joe Perry for sort of non-fans of middling English snooker players in the 90s was just that in the 90s. He was nicknamed the Gentleman, which is no bad comparison, Joe. And apparently he was 40 before he won his first ranking title. He's kind of like the bygone era of snooker players. You don't get many Joe Perrys now because it's become so international. And sorry to Joe Perry, but maybe more talent across the board than there used to be.
So are you saying there's still hope for me yet?
There is. So this week, in the newsroom, we will be looking at a few different stories. We'll take a look at Publicis' that's a tricky one to say, self-acclaimed big move into sport as it buys 160 over 90. And we're going to dig into Chelsea's financial results. Then we're going to be joined by Frank Dunne for Inside the Deal to delve into FIFA's media rights deal in Italy after the latest failure by the Azzurri to qualify for the World Cup, plus all the usual industry look-aheads and nonsense. Joe, what have you got coming up in your sports diary?
It's coming up. Well, it's been a pretty quiet week. Obviously, FA Cup on the back of international fixtures. I mean, the quadruple has died a death, right? So I went to Singapore a couple of weeks ago and quadruple was very much on. John and I are going to be in Budapest around the Champions League final, and I think he was secretly harbouring hopes of being there for the first ever British quadruple. That's not going to happen now, but there was some cheer this week for Lincoln City, another East Midlands team who have been promoted from League One to the Championship despite having one of the more modest budgets in that league. So that's good. And in terms of the rest of the week, well, I think it's going to look a bit like yours because this is a bit like Christmas week for you, isn't it, Martin?
Very much so. It's the Masters. I'm thinking about picking you up on your quadruple comment. I am certainly not a Celtic fan, but I think they won the treble in 1967. Which would mean they would have completed a quadruple, albeit maybe not a top-tier European quadruple. But anyway, let's not dwell on Celtic success. It is a big week. For me, it's the Masters, yeah. Big fan of this week. This is the week that I defy all industry research around linear TV viewing as I consume upwards of 50 hours of live TV quite happily, starting on the Monday night, I was sat watching a feature on Sky Sports from Augusta National about the botanists and all the flowers, names in Latin. I mean, I'm not a botanist at all, but I would consume any Masters content before it. The app is brilliant. Talked about this last year, actually. There's a funny guy on X who put this sort of Shawshank Redemption video at the end when there's reunited about golf fans being reunited with the app with sort of Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman coming together. So, yeah, that is a big one for me. I also have a news item for you, Joe, you might be excited about, or perhaps not. The lesser-known Emirates Arena here in Glasgow. News today, actually, that the new naming rights sponsor for the Emirates Arena did a story back in July 23, a link in the notes, that they were looking for a naming rights sponsor. Emirates was bowing out. The new naming rights sponsor is nobody at all. So it's going to be renamed the Glasgow International Arena. They kicked off a long 2-year search, really, to find one. They were paying about £500,000 a year previously. They sort of roped in various external people to find a sponsor on a commission basis. looking for a 5 to 10 year deal, planning to announce it 2024. Didn't happen. So just more proof that the market is tough up here. I mean, you're not getting week to week content there. You're getting, world champs, and they've held very flexible venues, held a lot of sports, World Indoors, World Badminton. But yeah, you're not getting the concerts they get at the Hydro, which is sponsored by OVO, or even at Hampden, which is now sponsored by Barclays. So sponsorship pounds and pence, quite hard to secure up here, it seems. Anyway, Joe, less of six-figure rights deals that didn't happen. Let's get stuck into it. We're going to go under the bonnet of Chelsea's financial results. So this was, everybody will have seen, the largest ever loss recorded, pre-tax loss recorded by a Premier League club. £262 million. Or in other words, Moses Caicedo plus Enzo Fernandez plus Alejandro Garnacho minus Noni Madueke, or around about that. Joe, talk us through the headline figures here. Just what on earth has gone on to get to that figure?
Yeah, it would be nice to go further under the bonnet, and I'm sure we can in time. But these still aren't the full accounts. This is just kind of an update on what's already been reported. And you might remember you were actually at the FT Business Football Summit, and UEFA did a presentation. Apparently it came as a surprise to some clubs, detailing financial results of certain clubs last season. And they actually had Chelsea losing €407 million, which is absolutely huge. So when you put it like that, the news last week that Chelsea lost £262.4 million perhaps is a positive. I don't know, maybe that's a bit of a reach. But yeah, Chelsea have recorded an almighty pre-tax loss. The reason for the discrepancy between that figure and UEFA is slightly different accounting techniques. But as you say, biggest ever Premier League loss, and biggest by some distance as well. No club before Chelsea this season had lost more than £200 million. So that puts it into some sort of perspective. And when you look across all sports, really, it's on the Mount Rushmore of sports club losses. Obviously, football leads the way. US accounting is slightly more opaque as well. So perhaps there are some losses concealed within US ecosystem. But yeah, it's right up there. I think the only other ones really that compare, perhaps Barcelona. You'll remember the lever era when they were looking for all sorts of levers during COVID, losing €555 million, I think. There were also some mitigations, pandemic being a big one of them, but there were some write-downs in the accounts. There were some more technical account reasons. So maybe it wasn't as huge as it seems, but Chelsea very much there. Revenue was £490 million, their second highest ever. So I think it probably just puts the loss into even more of a perspective, right? If you're making that much and losing that much, we're talking about huge numbers. In mitigation for Chelsea, I think they're saying this season, because these figures are for last season, this season, 25-26, they expect revenues to be much higher. They won the Club World Cup, which had a big prize pot, and also they're back in the Champions League, whereas last season they were playing Conference League. So yeah, huge numbers, a huge loss. And I think you'll know better than me, these stories sometimes are quite difficult to put into perspective when you're talking about such big numbers and there's not much to compare it to. You can almost lose track of the story. I don't know, for you, is this a big deal?
I mean, it is. I think you're right to point out that with any financial story we do, even writing about the likes of DAZN, it's always a story that's almost 12 months old. They did win the Club World Cup, and the huge amounts of prize money will flow into the next season's account. So we are not looking at the current picture of Chelsea Football Club. But yeah, naturally, it's a big story. The bigger story for us, in many ways, I suppose, is often how the commercial revenues are flowing, what they've done from the sponsorship point of view. Obviously, the shirt sponsorship miss, which will have contributed to this loss as well, because they've left money on the table there for successive seasons. So yeah, you can't deny the starkness of the figure and the usual warning that players are paid far too much in the English Premier League and elsewhere, but that will always go unheeded, I think, at most top clubs as they vie for positions. I mean, it interests me. It's always that kind of flow between commercial revenues and performance on the pitch. How did that work out for the season in question, performance versus how they did commercially? The TV revenues just skews the figures so much.
Mm, yeah, you're right. I think Chelsea seem to have explained that there were some write-downs in these accounts as well. There are a couple of players who were still on the books, but were very expensive and weren't able to play for them during that season. On-field performance was pretty good. I mean, like you say, we're casting our minds back a year now, but I think most Chelsea fans would probably take, to a certain level, would take last season's performances over certainly the ones they've had in recent weeks, where obviously they qualified for the Champions League, which will be very important. This week we found out that there'll be 5 qualification spots for English clubs in the Champions League again next season. So it would be very good for Chelsea's perspective to be able to get their hands on one of those. And the Club World Cup, which, I think perhaps not everyone saw it as a huge sporting spectacle, but in terms of a balance sheet, that should make a very healthy contribution to Chelsea's figures for this season. I mean, we're probably skirting around the topic here of financial fair play and
The elephant in the
PSR.
room, yes. Well,
The
that's more
elephant in the room.
Coventry City's the elephant in the room coming up. But yes,
Yeah,
tell us, how are they complying?
as a fan of a club that has been docked, and fairly so, for PSR breaches, it does interest me how a club like Chelsea can, on the face of it, lose so much money and avoid punishment. PSR, just so listeners are aware, allows losses of £105 million over 3 seasons. But perhaps important to note that's not just the pure pre-tax loss. There are other caveats involved there, which means you can't deduce exactly from clubs' balance sheets whether they're over or under the limit. And those filings have to be made by the end of December each year. So I think the fact that there's been no movement on that front probably suggests Chelsea don't have a case to answer to. Look, that's just speculation. Maybe they do. But from Forest's perspective, we found out sooner than now. Next season, the rules change again. So it was an 85% squad cost limit, which basically means your on-field spending. So that's things like transfer fees, wages, other costs associated with players. They have to be within 85% of a club's revenues. So Chelsea last season made 490 million. You can do some quick maths to work out what their squad's limit will be as a result going forward. I think on the face of it, that perhaps disadvantages a club like Chelsea, which, although obviously has a big global footprint, has a relatively small stadium, can't host the same number of events as, say, Tottenham, slightly hamstrung in that sense. So that might not be great news for Chelsea. The other factor, obviously, is UEFA. UEFA have more stringent rules. It's 70% rather than the Premier League's 85%. But as of today, Chelsea seem to have found a way. We know in previous seasons they've been slightly creative. They've sold assets within Blueco, creating something of a paper profit. There's the hotel, the car park for women's team. And obviously, they've managed to amortize transfer fees over very long-term contracts, 7, 8-year contracts, although the rules of that have changed as a result. And as much as it frustrates Chelsea fans, I think probably not shopping on the top shelf and looking for younger players in French market and so on probably helps keep wages down to lower than what they would be if they were still looking to bring in players from City and Barcelona and so on. So yeah, they've found a way. It's a story that might well develop. At the moment, it's a huge record pre-tax loss, and we'll see where it goes from here. What about you? What's your story of the week?
Well, I'm actually just going to clarify I realise how obscure my Coventry reference is going to be lost on some people, that Coventry City have an elephant in their badge, hence the elephant in the room reference. Coventry are big on elephants, can't move for elephants in Coventry. Anyway, that was that reference. I also like the way that you said euro and not euros. That was very Irish. The Irish say euro for plural of euro. Anyway, yeah, I'm going to move from one top-heavy fraction to another in 160 over 90. Do you like it? Which is the creative marketing agency hitherto owned by WME Group, which was Endeavour. They have found a buyer in Publicis, French ad agency, really, which says it's making a big bet on sports, which interests me as to, it's the latest in the sort of empire of Endeavour WME portfolio being sold. But it's a very interesting time to make a big bet on sports. I suppose as a creative marketing agency, it's a very interesting time to be making a big bet on anything, given that the rise, certainly maybe in the design agency space, slightly different, of AI as a rival to what the company's output can be. But it's that very reason, and actually referenced in the statement from Arthur Sadoub, who's the CEO of Publicis, that kind of sports live experience and its unpredictability is part of the reason they've kind of moved into the sports vertical. And he actually said specifically in the age of AI, it has become one of the most high-value channels for clients, delivering unparalleled cultural relevance, live engagement, and measurable impact. So that's the why. In terms of the what, the deal has actually been reported north of $500 million by the Wall Street Journal. So Endeavor acquired 160/90 for $200 million in 2018 from Searchlight Capital, which is a private equity firm. So a tidy old profit there. There will be, post-takeover, a strategic partner. They love a strategic partnership in sports industry comms. There's going to be another strategic partnership. Maybe let's just start calling it a partnership. I mean, I take it as read that every deal now done in sport will have a strategy behind it. So there's going to be a partnership between WME and Publicis, although they don't say what that is. PR line is they're going to create a global platform to drive measurable business outcomes by connecting brands and fans and audiences, etc. But they've got quite a long list of sports clients, 160/90, for which they provide various campaigns and activation, including for the World Cup this summer, FIFA World Cup, Anheuser-Busch, Coke, Visa. A lot of the activation and experiential stuff will be done by them. Others, Olympic sponsors that they work with, NFL, Mercedes F1, World Table Tennis. So this really moves Publicis more directly into this kind of brand activation area, and also on the back of the acquisition of Bespoke Sports and Entertainment and Adopt, their two US-based consulting and experiential agencies, really. It's an area we don't often go super deep on because it's not a sponsorship deal and it's the activation itself by the brand, but it was one that was kind of intrinsically linked to Endeavor and a very important part of monetizing any sponsorship investment. And for Publicis now to see this as an opportunity, it can only be good news in terms of the health of the industry. But yeah, I found it notable that they picked now and this moment of AI's rise to identify sports as one that they can monetize.
And I guess also notable for being the latest part of a breakup of the WME group empire. What does that mean and where do they go from here?
Yeah, I mean, the WME Group became the new name for what was Endeavor. There was the sale of large parts of IMG, of On Location Professional Bull Riders, Madrid Miami Open. TKO inherited a lot of those apart from the tennis tournaments. So yeah, moves it out of that kind of stable. It was for a while, IMG would kind of leverage it as maybe part of their full service offering, if you like. So they kind of lose that. Robbie Henchman, I don't know if you've seen him, he's in a lot of Bond films, Robbie Henchman, or he should be. He was president of 160/90. He's going to retain a role actually in post-takeover, but he was a major guy at IMG for a long time, president of events and global partnerships. So yeah, it was a tool they had, if you like, that is like IMG Arena. It's not so much a tool, but all these sister and brothers of IMG have now found different families. This one, been adopted by new French parents. So we'll see how they get on.
IMG empty nesters, are they?
Pretty much. No, not at all. Still a lot going on at IMG. Excellent. Well, let's move on from some of the tastier news items of the week. We're going to be joined after the break by Frank Dunne, who's going to talk us through the dynamics of the latest FIFA World Cup rights deal in Italy, as the Azzurri failed to qualify once again.
From private equity to global media and US college sports, unlock the most trusted data and insights in our reports. Explore more at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back. It's time to go inside the deal, and we've been joined by Sport Business Editor-at-Large Frank Dunne, who has written comprehensive history of the last 25 years of media rights deals for the World Cup in Italy. And of course, that's especially timely this week because Italy have just missed out on World Cup qualification for the third time in a row. Frank, welcome to the pod. And first of all, perhaps tell us what is the reaction on the ground? Utter despair, I imagine.
It's still very fresh. I think we're probably in the third stage of grief at the moment, which, if I remember correctly, is anger and bargaining. So we're still in the phase of lots of finger pointing. We've had the resignations, Gattuso, the coach, most of his coaching staff, Gravina from the federation. And there's a lot of horse trading going on now as to who's going to be the new coach and discussion about who's going to be the new head of the federation. So, yeah, there is anger, and there's also a lot of discussion. I mean, I think without turning it into a kind of dissertation, my analysis is that there are three schools of thought whenever Italy go out of a World Cup, which is unfortunately the third time now consecutively. There's the episodic school, which says that basically if Bastoni had stayed on his feet, we wouldn't be having this conversation now. Football's about episodes. There is the systemic school, which says that Italian football is systemically problematic, going down to youth level and grassroots level, and that's where the answer lies. And then there's the whole sociological school, which says that football is just merely a reflection of society, and what we're dealing with is the decline of Italian society, probably since the Romans, I imagine. So, yeah, there are all sorts of theories, but as you can imagine, it's wall-to-wall analysis here since the Bosnia defeat.
Yeah, let's dig into a bit of the detail, Frank. I mean, I'm very curious around, well, the timing, first of all, is always crucial in this. I mean, we wrote a story in mid-October when FIFA went to market. At that time, it was pretty clear Italy were going to finish second. November 25th, I think, was the deadline for bids. So why did FIFA go to market when it did? And crucially, why did it want to get a deal done when it did? And what has the outcome been in terms of what Rai and DAZN have ended up with?
Well, FIFA's approach has always been they want to try and get all of the deals sewn up before the qualification process is over. Historically, it's always been the case that broadcasters kind of accept that when they do the deal, then they don't know for sure whether their country is going to be in or not. So there's always an element of gamble. Italian broadcasters have always, going back as far back as I can remember, have always tried to hold things off as long as possible. I mean, I think even the first deals that I covered for SportBusiness Media were probably the deals for 2002, which were done in around 99, 2000. And even then, Rai was trying to hold things back as long as possible. The Italian broadcasters like to see the outcome. They don't like to gamble. And on this occasion, FIFA didn't manage to bring Rai or anyone else to the table prior to the end of the qualification process. So the negotiation took place in that little hiatus between Italy coming second and the two knockout games, the two playoff games. FIFA was really determined to get everything wrapped up before the qualification on the final two games told us whether Italy were through or not. What I understand from the conversations I've had is that Rai's initial bargaining position was that they were going to offer a figure for the World Cup rights, which I think was about 70 million, but they would have offered a bonus if Italy had gone through. So it was a conditional deal. That was the original idea on the table, and I think it would have taken it up to about 115 million. Now, FIFA has always rejected any kind of deal conditional upon the qualification of a particular team, and it's obvious why they do that, because they would become hostage to fortune. I mean, there are two reasons really why FIFA won't do that. First of all, because it obviously means that the moment they accept a deal conditional upon qualification, then they have a financial interest in the outcome of a particular game. So, most recently, had FIFA accepted the idea of a bonus in the event of Italy's qualification, that would have meant that against Northern Ireland, against Bosnia, FIFA stood to gain 40, 45 million euros by Italy winning. It would have had a financial vested interest in Italy winning. Now, if you imagine if you're the Football Federation of Northern Ireland or of Bosnia, and there's a dodgy decision in the last minute which goes in Italy's way, and you subsequently find out that FIFA stood to gain 40, 50 million euros, it's inconceivable that FIFA would agree to that. But also, FIFA will never agree to that because it just simply doesn't want to create the precedent whereby they give one particular country the option of waiting, because at that point, then every broadcaster is going to say, well, hang on, if Rai can do that, why can't we can do it? BBC, ITV, Germany, France, they're all going to say that. So FIFA has never accepted that. So in the end, what happened was that they couldn't accept this conditional deal, so they convinced Rai to up the base offer. Now, what that meant, and we think final figure that Rai paid, about 85 million of a total that FIFA earned in Italy of around 120, with DAZN making up the other 35. What it meant is that it was a good deal for Rai at 85. And had Italy gone through, Rai stood to do well out of the tournament. But I think overall, 120 million for Italy with no Italian team, that's a pretty good deal for FIFA. It's not a fantastic deal. It's less than 2022, but it's more than 2018. So I think for FIFA, they're going to be pretty happy with the deal. Obviously, it could have been higher, but yeah, I think all things considered, my understanding is that FIFA's pretty content with how it turned out.
And maybe a bit of housekeeping for listeners who haven't had a chance to read on Sport Business Media, links in the blurb. Who has what and why have they gone that way?
Well, there are two deals. Rai, the state broadcaster, has 35 games, so it's going to have the best game each day. And what we understand is it will show those games on its flagship channel, Rai Uno, to get the best possible audience. And so that includes up to the semi-final and the final. DAZN has all 104 games. Now, DAZN is the subscription streaming service, which was launched in Italy in 2018. My understanding is that they're paying around 35 million for the deal. So the total FIFA is earning from Italy is around 120 million euros. And yeah, I think that's, as I say, could have been better and it could have been worse. So I think it's not a bad deal. I think DAZN has come out of it pretty well.
And as you mentioned already, that total, it's down on 2022, but up on 2018. And all three of those World Cups took place without Italian involvement. So why did the value fluctuate? And is there anything that perhaps FIFA could have done differently in terms of the timing to this time around?
If we go back to 2018, it's slightly different mechanics because the rights at that time were held by the agency, MP and Silva, which had done a deal with FIFA to be the sales agent. So the agency had made a guaranteed offer to FIFA to take the rights. So it was the agency selling the rights on the market. They hadn't managed to get a deal with a broadcaster before the entire qualification process was over. Italy were knocked out. So they were forced to go to the market knowing that no Italy in the competition. Rai, my understanding is they offered only 65 million euros for the rights, knowing that without Italy, the ratings would have been lower. The ratings are good always generally in Italy for a World Cup, but clearly if you have the national team involved, especially if they get to the latter stages, and they won it in not as long as ago as 2006 or 20 years ago, then it's going to be a big difference. So they lowballed a little bit. The agency, they were under pressure to recoup their money. They'd actually valued the 2018 rights at about 185 million euros, only 65 on the table from Rai. So they ended up doing a deal with Mediaset, the commercial broadcaster. And my recollection is that Mediaset paid around 78 million euros for the deal. So it was a good deal for Mediaset, not a great deal for the agency and not a great deal for FIFA.
Frank, I'm wondering what success can Rai make of this now, given the circumstance? I mean, I just did some quick maths, but I think it's about 2.45 million euros per game that they'll be paying. They're going to live and die by the viewing figures. I look back at the 22 World Cup final, obviously maybe held at a slightly more favourable time, but 16.1 million viewers and a 74% share during the penalty shootout in the final. But yet Rai is not purely dependent on advertising revenue, obviously, as a public broadcaster. How can they make the best of clearly not the situation they wanted?
Well, I mean, they're going to get big audiences for most of the games. They got the first pick. They got the best game each day. And certainly as the tournament progresses, they're going to get decent viewing figures. But as you pointed out, they are about 50% funded through advertising and about 50% through the payment of a license fee. So they can always fall back on the argument that any discrepancy between income and cost. I mean, when they bought, I think they paid 165 million euros for 2022 rights, which they showed all 64 games. And it was reported in their financial results at the end of that year that they earned around between 60 and 65 million from advertising. So a big shortfall between what they paid and their advertising income. But they can always say, well, look, we're a public service broadcaster. This is the cost of our public service remit. The World Cup without Italy doesn't have the same importance to the Italian people, but it's still the World Cup. It's still our duty as the national broadcaster to bring the biggest competition in the world to the widest audience possible. That's what they're going to fall back on, I think. But I mean, they'll do okay, but their ability to drive advertising revenue is not the same as it is with commercial broadcasters. By law, they're limited in the number of advertising minutes that they can put in each hour. So a broadcaster like Mediaset is always going to do better with the same content. The 2018 competition, Mediaset paid 78 million for the rights, and we think they earned between 95 and 100 million on advertising. Now, Mediaset is purely commercial. They are brilliant. They are brilliant at selling advertising space. That's their DNA. Lou Grade, the old ITV founder, famously described commercial television as a license to print money. And it may have been the case in the 60s. But I mean, Mediaset has a track record kind of being a license to print money. They're brilliant at leveraging their content for advertising revenue. So I don't think anyone would ever expect Rai to match Mediaset. But as I say, as a public service broadcaster, I think they will be happy. I'm fairly sure that they will be glad that they have not ended up paying more because, with 35 games, I think they've managed to maintain a reasonable cost base. And I think they'll get good ratings. Could have been better with Italy, obviously, but they'll be okay, Raya.
And in DAZN's case, it's obviously very handy summer inventory between the bookends of the Serie A season. One of the things I find most extraordinary about Italy failing to qualify 3 times in a row, as an England fan, is that they still found time in between that to beat England in the Euro 2020 final, which I guess just kind of highlights the absurdity of both being an Italian fan and an English fan, as you well know, Frank.
Great shame. That was a great shame. Great shame, must say.
FIFA will be very keen to see Italy back at the top table, I'm sure. And I presume you have an Italian flag somewhere in your apartment gathering dust right now. So what is the outlook for Italian football? Can it get back to a World Cup, short of getting the hosting rights to a World Cup?
Well, the Euro 20 victory, which obviously happened in 2021 because of COVID, as you say, fell in the middle of all of these exits from the World Cup. So that's a kind of counter argument to the systemic argument that there is a systemic problem in Italian football. I think that around the same time as Italy lost to Bosnia, something I think potentially more significant was slightly lost in all of that. And that was when Alexander Ceferin, the head of UEFA, said that as things stand at the moment with the level of stadium preparation, Italy stands to lose its hosting of Euro 2032, which it's due to co-host with Turkey. Now, if that were to happen, I think that would be even bigger blow to the Italian football system than going out of the World Cup. I think everybody knows who follows football that one of the Achilles heels in Italian football is the state of the stadiums, the fact that clubs don't own their own stadium. They're owned mostly, with a few exceptions, Juventus being the most famous. They're owned mostly by the local councils. They've fallen into disrepair. They're pretty, even the bigger, the better ones are pretty decrepit, pretty run down. If they don't manage to get the hosting of 2032, because that's the obvious moment in which they're going to be able to get funding, they're going to be able to get these stadiums upgraded. Now, that in itself is not the answer, but it's really important. I mean, the experience of going to see a Serie A game compared to the experience of going to see a game in the Bundesliga or in the Premier League or even in Liga 1 or in the Spanish Liga has really fallen behind. That's a pretty important thing. But I mean, looking for longer signs, I mean, the Italian youth levels that are kind of under 17, under 19, they've been doing really well in recent years. So, I mean, it looks as though at kind of grassroots youth level, the structures are in place. They seem to be doing okay. My observation, having seen a lot of grassroots football, a lot of youth football in Italy, and this might be something which goes beyond Italy, but it seems to me that a lot of fantasy and imagination and individualism is being coached out of young players in Italy. I mean, if you look at the current generation of Italian players, it's hard to find a real obvious number 10. I mean, you think of the country that produced Rivera, Mazzola, Roberto Mancini, Gianfranco Zola, or you think of the country that produced players like Baggio, and you look around for players, either dribblers or natural number 10s, natural kind of playmakers, fantasisti. There's a real dearth of that kind of player. So I think there are some coaching culture specific questions that need to be resolved. And that is one of the big debates going on at the moment, because a few years ago, Roberto Baggio was brought in to the Football Federation, and he actually produced a dossier arguing for a change in the culture to move away from this very team-based idea that the coaches, when they leave Coverciano with their coaching masters, Coverciano, which is the technical center, produces brilliant coaches who are working all around the world. You know many of them in the Premier League. But it does look as though it's moved towards this very team-based, very system-based, very arid vision of football. And I think that there's a feeling abroad now in the country that they need to basically take the handbrake off and let kids learn how to dribble, let kids make mistakes, let them learn how to have fun playing football and try and get back to something a bit more individualistic.
One final one for me, Frank. The whole area is fascinating, especially for somebody of my generation who grew up on, Maldini and Baresi and Baggios. But flipping it back to the right side and DAZN, I mean, I suppose it is a blow for them as well. They were going to simulcast the Italy games, but yet in showing all games at such a low price per match, it follows on from the Club World Cup. I suppose it gives them that night consistency. DAZN actually, and it was a wider conversation, haven't maybe gone for as many World Cup rights as people thought they might have on the back of the Club World Cup wider agreement. I think obviously they have a cooperation in Spain with MediaPro, they have the rights in Italy, and I think Japan, although Joe might shout at me if I get that wrong. But yeah, I mean, can they make it work for them? Their focus, given Rai's ability to show the Italy games, had they qualified, that was never the thrust of the deal for them, was it?
I think it's a brilliant deal for DAZN, honestly, and I think they've got a lot of volume of great content at a reasonably low price per match, as you said at the top. The obvious commercial things for a subscription broadcaster, it gives them a defense against summer churn. I mean, all subscription businesses which are heavily based on football. I mean, DAZN has been the main broadcaster of Serie A. DAZN launched in Italy in 2018, and they've really invested heavily in becoming the primary broadcaster of the domestic championship Serie A. They show all 10 games. But I think it's fair to say that they've had a fairly checkered history. They're not universally loved as a sports platform in Italy. And I think the combination of the Club World Cup last year and the World Cup in the summer, that could be a real turning point for them. If they play it right, if they handle it right, if they go about the coverage and they have the good people around it. I remember going back to the 2006 World Cups. Sky Italia was formed in 2003 from the merger of Stream and Telepiù. They bought the rights, the pay television rights to the 2006 World Cup. Obviously, they had the good fortune that Italy won that, but the success they had on the way that they presented that, even though Rai had the Italy games and was delivering much bigger audiences, the success that Sky Italia had on the back of that was transformational for them in terms of their positioning, in terms of their brand. And I've spoken to people over the years at Sky. Sky had shared the rights to 2006 World Cup, 2010, 2014, and then they didn't bid for 2018. They weren't given the chance. They didn't try to buy rights from Rai 2022. But they said to me, the people who worked for Sky at the time, they said, look, we know this is not going to really move the dial for us in terms of adding new subscribers. Yes, it will help us in a defense against churn, but it's really a marketing spend. This is really all about positioning. It's about branding. It's about establishing ourselves as the home of football, the home of sports. And I think this summer, that opportunity now falls to DAZN. 2018, 2025, 26, they've had a slightly rocky road in Italy. This could be transformational for them if they get it right.
Well, on that note, thank you very much, Frank. And as we say, you can read all about these deals as well as every other FIFA World Cup rights deal in Italy all the way back to 1998 in the Sport Business Media piece in the blurb. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with AOB.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with Sport Business newsletters, covering the biggest stories driving the industry, delivered straight to your inbox at no cost. Sign up today at sportbusiness.com.
Hello again, and now time for our weekly epilogue of the sports industry. Sometimes serious, sometimes not, sometimes insightful, occasionally funny. Joe, you're going serious on your look ahead. Tell me, hit me with it.
Yeah, 2 p.m. Central European Time, 21st of April. Does that mean anything to you, Martin?
What day of the week is that?
How are you testing me? I can tell you exactly what it is. It is the deadline for first round bids in a whole swathe of countries for UEFA club competition rights for 28 to 31. They are Austria, Belgium, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Denmark, Finland, Ireland, Norway, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Slovakia, Sweden, Switzerland, and breathe, Canada, Brazil, and separately South America, Central America, and Mexico. So it's the second wave of the sales process. We've spoken already on this podcast several times now about the first wave in the major European markets and what a success that was for UC3 and for relevant football partners, the sales agent. And so now it's all about keeping up the momentum in this second wave of territories. I mean, it covers a huge landmass. It's Europe, it's South America as well. The strategy, from what we gather, is trying to bring pan-regional players into the mix, giving them the opportunity to bid in multiple markets at once. So let's see if that continues. I know it'll be a very busy time for lots of people at UC3, RFP, and the broadcasters in those markets right now. But if it's anything like the first wave, it'll be a very busy afternoon for us that week.
That's a kind of list of Eurovision Song Contest strongholds in there, plus maybe some expansion markets for them. So the big question is, how big does Paramount go in individual countries or even in some kind of regional way? It will be fascinating to see. We've done a few look-aheads to the World Cup, and obviously we just spoke to Frank, who gave us a lot of insight into the Italian media rights deal. I just wanted to share my experiences. I suppose it's occasionally we become consumers as well as journalists. I did spend 5 hours, like most people, spent a lot of hours on the ticketing platform queue as I continue my bid to get tickets for Scotland, Morocco, and Scotland, Brazil. I spent 5 hours and I got to the end of the process. Well, first of all, I was put in the wrong queue, actually. So they put some people in the wrong queue. They put them into the participating member associations queue, which was the 4 teams that went through the playoffs. Then you needed to add a code for. So completely the wrong queue. I got into that quite quickly. Then, to be fair, the connection was stable throughout and it did work. And I got into the ticketing zone, and essentially my best offer was to pay $240 to go and watch Uzbekistan against DR Congo in Atlanta, which, I would go to the game, but maybe not pay that. Not my idea of great fun. There was some crazy prices kicking around. At one point, I saw a ticket for $45,000 was listed, including FIFA's commission for Scotland, Brazil. Yes, I totally understand that FIFA's not setting the prices for this, but that would be my point. Why is there not a cap on this? It just seems a bit obscene that this resale platform is essentially operating like any commercial resale platform would, and you've not come in with a governing body and said, well, actually, hang on, this is the fair value cap on what should be charged. Of course, there's dynamic pricing now. A lot of prices for the smaller games will likely come way down closer to the event. So let's see what happens closer to the event. And at the event, I'm really curious to see if we have a repeat of the Club World Cup when prices plummeted right before. It does leave a bit of a sour taste in the mouth as a fan, which is a great shame. But this event is being monetized to the full, as we know.
Not to downplay those very valid concerns, but come on, halfway line tickets for Scotland versus Brazil. How much are you willing to part with?
Oh, good question. Am I getting a caipirinha? I don't know. Let's talk. Let's negotiate. It might stretch into 4 figures, but yeah, it's an experience.
You are the reason dynamic pricing exists.
Well, that's true. Maybe not. Maybe a middle 3 figures then. Let's move it down. Joe, what else have you got before we bring this to a close?
Look, you mentioned the World Cup and not only ticketing season, but we're getting into that time before a tournament where sponsors and licensees bring out their merch, which I know you get very excited about. And the merch that's just dropped is courtesy of Unilever. See if you like the sound of any of this. So Radox have a limited edition Feel Energized FIFA World Cup shower gel. Dove have 2 limited edition FIFA Active Comfort deodorants and a 3-in-1 hair, face and body wash. Sure,
if you need 2 deodorants, you're in a bit of a bad place, but anyway.
Well, sure, 3 of them. 3 limited edition deodorants with unique rotating World Cup themed artwork that encourages shoppers to collect all 3. So collectible deodorants. But what really caught my eye was Lynx. There's a special World Cup refresh for Lynx Africa.
Yes.
There's a number 10 body spray and shower gel, so presumably you smell like Maradona or one of those great Italian number 10s that Frank mentioned. And the pièce de résistance is the all-new Lynx Marshmallow Smoke Fire Fragrance Premium Body Wash, which they say delivers our most sensational shower experience yet in a slick limited edition FIFA bottle. It features a cozy, sensual scent with notes of vanilla, hazelnut, and dark musk crafted by renowned perfumers. And they say simply squeeze it out, lather in your body, and enjoy a multi-sensory shower experience.
Dear,
So
no,
have you ever enjoyed a multi-sensory shower experience?
Not in recent memory, that's for sure. Well, yes, actually, that mint shower gel from Original Source is an experience and a half. Yeah, I would try that one. Nobody wants to smell the marshmallows coming out of the shower, but I'm all for anything World Cup branded. I will buy. Budweiser coming out with some very cool cans and bottles with all the old World Cup logos on it. So I don't even drink, and I would happily buy some of those. So yeah, bring it on. I'll buy any tat you've got, FIFA, but only an acceptable price. I just wanted to end on SportAccord, a semi-serious, semi-funny point. They have my fullest sympathy, SportAccord convention. They have been through a hell of a time. The news being that the Baku event is postponed, given the border shared with Iran and everything that's going on there. SportAccord, for those who don't know, is a convention that every year, typically, would be a major meeting point for the Olympic movement and the whole bidding movement, which, yes, is not the same as it once was in terms of competition, clearly. But a big event for us. I went in Birmingham in 2024 and actually got the exclusive about Glasgow being in the frame to host the Commonwealth Games. The run of events they have had cancelled is astonishing. If you go back, the Gold Coast, I think, was 2019, then awarded to Beijing for 2020. Obviously, COVID happened. Then they just tried to host an event in Lausanne during that time, couldn't host it. Then decided to do a hosting deal with Yekaterinburg in Russia. Had to reschedule it to 2022 as things in the region got slightly tasty. Then had to cancel that event altogether. They managed to host Birmingham in 2024. Then in 2025, hosting deal with Turkey. Political uprising, really, or unrest, certainly, in the region led to that postponement. Didn't happen last year. And now Baku, which was meant to be at the tail end of next month, is not happening. So they're still looking for a host for next year and are in discussions that we may be going Europe, we may be another continent, Africa, maybe, who knows? Let's see. But I mean, I'm just waiting till the press release next year, which will no doubt say that the city of X is delighted to be named host of the 2027 SportAccord convention, although we note with concern the now impending threat of civil unrest, pandemic outbreak, regional warfare, or Russian aggression. Yeah, I'm semi-serious. Our hearts go out to them because they've had a hell of a time, but what a run.
Yeah, like you say, you can't help but feel for them. But if you are going on holiday next year, have a look where SportAccord's heading and as far as you can in the opposite direction.
And check your insurance policy. Anyway, enough of that nonsense. Plenty of insights this week. Our thanks to Frank for coming on the pod. Our thank you to snooker sensation Joe Perry for stepping in the void. And everything we've discussed today will be in the episode description at the bottom of this podcast. And as always, for the most accurate rights, fees, cross media and sponsorship, and a fair bit of good news as well, please head to sportbusiness.com. And we will be back next week with John. See you later.